Hello, you're watching Global Insight with me, Young. Here from Arirang News Centre in Seoul, we connect with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. We're less than 75 days away from the US presidential election, where President Donald Trump will be going head-to-head with Joe Biden, who the Democratic Party officially nominated this week as their candidate for the race to the Oval Office. During the Democratic National Convention, Liberal heavyweights including President Barack Obama, President Bill Clinton and numerous senators showed their support for Biden, while heavily criticising the Trump administration's foreign policy, which they claimed have weakened America's status and alliances around the world. Now, how would a Biden administration change the course of President Trump's America First policy, and would it be for the better? We discussed this today with Klaus Lares, Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina and former Senior Policy Advisor at the German Embassy in Beijing. Hello there, Dr. Lares.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. And we also connect with James Carafano, Vice President of Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Good morning.
Good to be with you.
Well, thank you both for joining us on the programme today. Well, my first question goes to Dr. Lares. So we've had a lot of criticism this week from the Democratic Party towards the Trump administration's America First policy over the years. Would you agree with them? Would you agree that with the Democrats that his policy has weakened trust among allied countries?
Yes, on the whole, I agree with that. I think Trump's relations with the allied partners, particularly in Europe, but also in Asia, like South Korea, has been pretty disastrous. There's been no other president before Trump who questioned whether it would be sensible to maintain NATO. And there were even rumors that Trump had intentions to withdraw America from the NATO alliance, which of course would really mean the end of the NATO alliance. So as far as alliances are concerned, I think Trump has been pretty poor, and it remains to a new government to really undo the damage and to solidify the North Atlantic Alliance.
Well, same question goes to you, Dr. Carafano. Would you say that President Trump's foreign policy has been detrimental for America, as the Democrats are claiming?
I don't think the facts are consistent with that criticism. So, for example, if we look at Asia, all the key alliances are very much stronger than they were 4 years ago. India, US-India partnership, Australia, Japan, South Korea and the US have been terrific the last 4 years in dealing with the concerns about North Korea. The Middle East has actually been transformational. We're seeing new partnerships. The United Arab Emirates recently announced it's normalizing relations with Israel, largely because of the US. The US has a string of solid relationships there. Iraq's actually in a better place than it's been for quite some time. Europe, I think, is actually a much more optimistic picture than the critics would have you believe. Look, the US has actually engineered a tremendous reinvestment in NATO of over $100 billion and focus on issues like the Arctic and China that everybody recognizes are important. U.S. relations with the Central European countries are much, much stronger. The relations with the Nordic countries are excellent. Literally, the U.S.-UK relationship's been revitalized. The only real troubled relations really are with France and Germany, and those are for reasons that have a lot to do with internal European politics. In France and Germany, has much to do with the United States. I don't think a change in American leadership would really make much of a difference. And then if you look at the parts of the world we don't talk about, Latin America, for example, the U.S.-Mexico relationship is great. The U.S. did a trade deal with Canada and Mexico, unprecedented in recent history. Much better relations with Brazil, much stronger relations with the Central American countries. Even in Africa, this administration's actually been very, very proactive. So if you actually look country by country at the status of bilateral relations, it's very, very difficult to sustain an argument that those relations have done anything but actually gotten better in the last 4 years.
So we've got
if I may say that, so I can't really agree with that. When you travel in Europe, the image of America and the disgust of America is as large as it has never been before. Even during the Iraq invasion under George W. Bush, there was a great animosity towards the United States at that time. Even then, the general picture, the general sentiments were much more pro-American than they are now. I think Trump really has destroyed transatlantic solidarity. And that doesn't just refer to Germany and France, but he is right that, of course, in Germany and in France, the antipathy towards Trump is particularly large. But even if you go to the UK, you know, the traditional special relationship between Britain and the United States has really gone away. We had recently the 5G Huawei case where the British were forced by the United States essentially to make a U-turn and ban Huawei from their 5G networks. Whether that is right or wrong, whether that is good or bad is difficult to judge, but that the United States, the Trump administration, browbeat the UK into doing that, that really went down very, very poorly in Britain. Prime Minister Johnson himself was not in favor of that policy, though some in his cabinet were, but he had no choice. You know, after leaving the EU, after Brexit, the UK has nowhere else to go but to siding with the United States. If Johnson had lost the confidence of President Trump, and Trump put really strong pressure on him, threatening all sorts of consequences, he could not afford not to withdraw from Huawei. Whether or not that was a good decision or not, that is, doesn't matter for the sake of argument, that it was really strong American pressure. And I think something like that doesn't go down very well. And if Trump sides with countries in Europe like Hungary and Poland and officially and formally fades their leaders, and these are illiberal anti-democratic leaders, very nationalistic anti-democratic leaders, which the EU and many other countries around the world have condemned for their anti-democratic policies, this is not a good sign. An American president, the leader of the free world, who should be a role model for democracy, should not side with autocrats and dictators. He shouldn't side with allies like Saudi Arabia either. After the Khashoggi murder, Trump's people met in close embrace with the Saudi Arabian crown prince. And that doesn't go down very well in the world. This is actually pretty poor. And I think that has undermined American alliances. So I don't quite agree with that optimistic picture which my colleague here just painted.
Yeah, I would just say in response, I think your assessment's just factually incorrect. And if you look at the UK, for example, the decision to reverse on Huawei in the UK was driven by the Conservative Party membership. It wasn't US pressure. It was the Conservatives in the government that insisted that the UK change its position. The government has actually acknowledged that its position was wrong. And the decision in the UK to ban Huawei is actually quite popular. So I don't think that's a legitimate issue to raise. Yes, the US is and the president is very popular in Central Europe. He's also has very strong relations with the NATO countries and is incredibly popular in the Baltic countries. And these countries are very, very strong democracies. And the point about his popularity in Germany and France, look, U.S. popularity is an ephemeral issue. People remember during the years Ronald Reagan was deeply unpopular because of a lot of his policies, but the transatlantic community was unified and strong, and in the end, many of his policies led to the end of the Cold War. So there's partisan politics in Europe and there's partisan politics in the United States. But if you want to talk about the question that was asked, which is what's the state of the actual alliances, the reality is they're stronger than they were 4 years ago. That's just, I think, really an unimpeachable assessment.
Well, we have very different opinions here, I believe. And well, in terms of moving forward, I suppose, well, Joe Biden, he did serve as chair of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee during his time in Congress, and as vice president later during the Obama government, he helped President Obama with various foreign affairs back then. But if he becomes president, then Dr. Lares, how do you think he's going to set the tone for foreign policy?
Yeah. I think Biden is actually a good choice because he is a centrist. He can be supported by moderate Republicans and also by many in the Democratic Party and in the nation as such. So I think he is a very good choice. And he is centrist also in foreign policy issues. He has a very personal diplomacy style. People have said he has a backslapping style, little bit like Lyndon Johnson, and he builds up a personal relationship. And that has gone down very well with foreign leaders. And he knows, of course, many of them from his long years in the Senate and 8 years as vice president. So I think he will have a much more constructive approach to foreign policy. We know from President Trump that, unfortunately, he has abused a lot of foreign leaders. He has sent out insulting tweets. He makes insulting statements, which he then sometimes takes back. But still, that doesn't go down well at all. And people really have lost respect for the office of the American president when someone behaves in an insulting, offensive, and really vulgar way. And I don't think that most American politicians, certainly including Joe Biden, would actually do that. So I think that would be appreciated by Republicans as well, that centrist approach to foreign policy, that personal diplomacy style, which will really go towards leaders to forge new relationships and perhaps overcome some of the tension we have seen with China and many other countries in the world by also his use of his personal diplomacy. So I think actually Biden is the right man for the country, independent of whether he is a Democrat or Republican. And as I said, I do think that many moderate Republicans will be able to support Biden's foreign policy. And only today we saw that 50 Republican national security experts have said they will not vote for Trump because they find that Trump's foreign policy is not American foreign policy. It's not based on American values, but that they will support Joe Biden. And that, of course, indicates or confirms what I've just said, that many Republicans will feel quite confident that Joe Biden will do a good foreign policy for the country as such, for all people in the country, and hopefully overcome that very deep polarization in America, which also refers to foreign policy.
And well, there was a report in the UK Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago saying that Boris Johnson secretly hopes that President Trump will not win the November election. Well, Dr. Carafano, what do you think of this kind of report? And what do you think Biden will bring to the table if he does become president? Will we see him take on an Obama-style approach to foreign relations?
Well, I actually think there'll be more continuity than change, regardless of who wins in the election. Even if you wanted to magic back to the world of 4 years ago, the world is different today, and you have to deal with the geopolitics of today. So in Europe, for example, look, there's not going to be a reset with Russia. If we want a different relationship with Russia, we'd have to have a different Putin, and we're not going to get a different Putin. And I think even what I hear from my friends on who support President Biden, nobody's expecting Russia to be any less of a destabilizing threat to Western Europe than it is now. So I actually do think there'll be great continuity on that front. In the Middle East, Iran's the chief destabilizing threat in the Middle East. We have debates in the U.S. about the Iran deal. But ironically, it's very bipartisan that everybody agrees that Iran is a problem for the stability in the region. And the reality is there won't be any Iran deal to go back to. So whoever is president will have to continue to figure out how to deal with Iran. And I imagine the policy would actually look much the same. China is incredibly bipartisan. Both sides want a tougher policy on China. I don't think that's going to change. And if you look at North Korea, I think it's in America, policy towards Northeast Asia is bipartisan. We don't want a war. Nobody on either political party wants that. We recognize the importance of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, and we would like to eliminate or remove the nuclear threat to South Korea and the United States from North Korea. So you can like one candidate or not like one candidate, and fine, vote for whoever you want. I'm not political, but the reality is I believe that American foreign policy is going to look pretty much like it does now in January of 2021, regardless of how the election turns out.
So
may I disagree with that? I think he's right. You are right that there will be a lot of continuity regarding China, for example, also to some extent towards Russia. But I don't think that President Biden will meet with Kim in North Korea. That certainly will be very different. But I think what is all important is Biden's style. He will be more constructive towards both allies and foes. And I think that kind of animosity in international relations, which we have seen over the last 4 years, that very antagonistic, almost hostile style, that will not be there. And I think style matters in foreign relations. It's not just the content, but also how you approach a problem. And I can well see that President Biden would embark on negotiations with Xi Jinping again in Beijing about trade, about geopolitical issues, which would be more constructive than what we see now, where we just see shouting matches on both sides of the aisle, and that doesn't lead us to anywhere. So, the content may not be that different, but I think the whole approach would be very different, and I think it would uplift international relations, and that would be a great new optimism in the international world if Biden were indeed elected in November.
Of course. So that's exactly what we said when President Obama was elected, and he had great style, and we have great hopes, and they gave him a Nobel Prize. But in the end, it actually didn't make much of a difference. And if you look, for example, at the last several years of the Obama administration, the Europeans were actually deeply disappointed in President Obama. So I'm not saying that style doesn't matter. Presidential leadership is rhetoric and action. I think you have to look at both. But I think in the end, the exercise of American power is really the deciding factor here. But, we'll see, or maybe we won't see. We'll have to wait until November or January 2021 to find out.
Well,
Absolutely.
there are obviously opposing views, but of course, America's foreign policy goals remain the same, dealing with countries like China and Iran and also North Korea. And, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up the discussion here today. But that was Klaus Lares, Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina, and James Carafano, Vice President of National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
And to our viewers, thank you for joining us. Global Insight will be back on Monday in Korea. Have a wonderful weekend wherever you are. Goodbye.